something unexpected is happening among the disciples. Tensions are rising, hearts are being tested, and Jesus continues to walk a path no one fully understands. In episode 3 of The Chosen Season 5, we're brought into one of the most emotionally layered and spiritually intense moments in the series so far. It's not just about miracles or teachings anymore now. It's about how fragile faith can feel when pressure closes in. What happens when those who are closest to Jesus start questioning not just his plans but each other? And how does Jesus respond when even the faithful start to bend under the weight of fear, confusion, and expectation? Get ready, because this episode doesn't just move the story forward, it shakes the ground it's built on. As episode 3 begins, we're immediately thrown into the aftermath of the events that closed the previous episode. There's an uneasiness in the air, not the kind that comes from outside threats like Roman soldiers or angry Pharisees, but something internal, something much more difficult to handle. The disciples are restless. There's confusion about their next move, disagreements about what the mission even is, and more than anything, the silence from Jesus has left space for frustration to grow. What's powerful about this episode is that it doesn't rush to resolve these tensions. Instead, it allows them to breathe. The conflict between what the disciples expected when they chose to follow Jesus and what is actually unfolding before them is becoming more obvious. Some thought there would be more signs. Others expected clarity. But instead, they're getting long walks, unexpected detours, and teachings that are getting harder and harder to interpret. One of the key moments in this early part of the episode comes when a disagreement between two disciples nearly escalates into something bigger. Not because they hate each other, but because they love Jesus in different ways. And when people are afraid, even love can become a battleground. The episode doesn't tell us who is right or wrong, it simply shows us how real people struggle to stay united when their faith is stretched thin. This moment is especially important because it reminds us that being close to Jesus doesn't mean being free from doubt or frustration. In fact, sometimes, the closer you are, the more difficult the walk becomes. The disciples are learning that Jesus is not here to match their expectations. He's here to challenge and transform them. Meanwhile, we see Jesus doing something interesting. Instead of stepping in to fix the argument or provide clarity, he remains calm, almost distant. Not because he doesn't care, but because he knows the growth that needs to happen must come through the struggle. This is one of the recurring themes in The Chosen. Jesus allows tension not to punish, but to prepare. At the same time, the episode begins to show more of the external dangers that are closing in. Word is spreading about Jesus' growing influence, and not everyone is happy about it. The Romans are watching, the religious leaders are whispering, and the people are starting to talk. Some speak with hope, others with suspicion. The movement is no longer something small and quiet, it's growing. And as it grows, so does the risk. But perhaps the most striking part of this section is a scene where a disciple quietly confesses something that shocks even his closest friends. It's not a sin or a betrayal, but an honest confession of doubt. He admits that he doesn't understand what's happening, that he's scared, that he's starting to wonder if they've misunderstood the mission altogether. And instead of being met with anger, this moment becomes one of the most tender in the episode, because another disciple, who has also been struggling in silence, responds not with correction, but with solidarity. For a moment, the arguing stops. The confusion is still there, but it's no longer something they carry alone. This is where episode 3 starts to dig deeper. It's not just about what Jesus is doing, it's about how his followers are being shaped by what they don't yet understand. And that's where the story gets personal. Because for anyone who has ever felt lost in their faith, or unsure about what God is doing, this episode speaks directly to that pain. As the section closes, we're left with a question that echoes silently among the group. If this path leads to suffering, and we know it does, are we still willing to follow? Not just because of what Jesus might do, but because of who he is. That question doesn't get answered right away. And maybe that's the point. Faith, after all, is not about having all the answers. It's about staying on the path even when the road gets dark. As the story moves forward in episode 3, we start to feel a heavy silence hanging over the group. The disciples aren't just tired from travel, they're weighed down by everything they've been carrying. And not all of it is visible. There's emotional exhaustion, spiritual confusion, and the haunting feeling that something is coming, something they're not ready for. Jesus, in his quiet way, continues walking ahead of them. He's calm, peaceful, but he's not talking much. And for the disciples, this silence is becoming difficult to handle. When Jesus speaks, it's usually full of purpose, but when he's quiet, that's when their fears get louder. Thoughts they tried to push down start bubbling to the surface. One disciple finally speaks up, not to start an argument, but to ask a question that's been bothering him for a while. Why are we heading in this direction? Shouldn't we be going toward the crowds who are hungry for your words? Why are we walking away from opportunity? It's a fair question, especially because they've seen Jesus draw massive crowds before, heal the sick, preach with power. But now, it feels like he's avoiding the spotlight, and they don't understand why. Another disciple, clearly agitated, responds with a mix of frustration and sarcasm. Maybe he's waiting for the right moment, or maybe we're being tested. The tension sparks again. Different views, different hopes, but underneath it all is fear. What if we're following him into danger and don't even know it? This scene captures something real, not just about the disciples, but about all of us. Because following Jesus always includes moments where it feels like he's leading us into uncertainty. And sometimes, the greatest challenge isn't the danger ahead, it's the silence along the way. Then comes a moment of powerful contrast. A few of the disciples break away from the group temporarily, trying to find food or information from nearby towns. What they find instead is a chilling reminder that not everyone welcomes Jesus. Whispers turn to warnings. A Roman soldier eyes them with suspicion. A local vendor refuses to serve them. The name Jesus is starting to carry weight, and not just among the hopeful. People are afraid of what he represents. Back at the camp, another disciple, one of the quieter ones, shares a story from his past. It's not dramatic, but it's raw. He talks about how before Jesus, he had nothing, no purpose, no peace. And even though he doesn't understand everything that's happening now, he knows one thing for certain: he doesn't want to go back to who he was before. It's a vulnerable moment. No big miracle, just honesty. And it hits the others in a quiet, emotional way. This is where the episode really starts to lean into the heart of discipleship, not the glory, not the fame, but the deep, quiet cost. Following Jesus means leaving behind what was comfortable, even if what's ahead is uncomfortable. It means choosing the unknown over the familiar. But in the middle of this heaviness, Jesus finally speaks. Not to rebuke or correct, but to gently redirect their vision. He says something simple, yet filled with meaning. Faith isn't knowing where I'm leading. Faith is trusting that I'll be there when we arrive. The words land softly, but they carry weight. He's not giving a plan. He's offering presence. Still, not everyone is comforted. One of the disciples, struggling with personal pain, walks away from the group for a moment. He needs space. And when Jesus finds him later that night, the conversation they have is one of the most intimate and revealing of the season so far. The disciple confesses, "I thought by now things would make more sense, that you'd explain more, that the miracles would keep coming. But instead, I feel lost." Jesus doesn't argue. He doesn't try to convince him with grand words. Instead, he says something deeply personal. Even when you feel lost, I see you, and I'm still calling you. This is the heart of episode 3. Jesus doesn't promise comfort. He doesn't always give clarity. But he never stops calling. And the calling is not based on strength or understanding, it's based on relationship. As the night deepens and the disciples settle in, there's a small but meaningful change in the group. They're not suddenly full of answers. But there's a new sense of closeness. The kind that comes after shared pain. The kind that comes when people realize they're not alone in their confusion. The final moments of this section leave us with an image that stays with you. The group sitting quietly around a fire, no one speaking, but everyone present, waiting, hoping, trusting just a little bit more than before. And as the fire crackles, we're reminded that faith isn't built in the spotlight, it's forged in the silence, in the tension, in the walk through the unknown. As dawn breaks, there's a slight shift in the tone of the journey. The disciples begin packing their things, their movements a bit slower than usual. The weight of yesterday still lingers. It's not just physical fatigue, it's emotional exhaustion. Each of them is quietly processing their own questions, fears, and the uncertainties ahead. But just as they're getting ready to move on, the past catches up. A man appears on the edge of the road. He doesn't call out, doesn't make a scene. But when Jesus sees him, he stops. His eyes soften. Some of the disciples recognize the man, though not all of them know his full story. What unfolds next is not a dramatic confrontation, but a reminder that following Jesus also means facing the past and allowing him to heal not just bodies, but memories. This man carries shame. His eyes never quite meet anyone else's. He's hesitant to approach Jesus, and when he finally does, he doesn't ask for healing or a miracle. He simply says, "I heard you were near, and I hoped you'd see me." That one sentence, so simple, so desperate, brings a stillness to the group. Because they've all been there at some point. Wanting to be seen, wanting to know they're not invisible to the Messiah. Jesus doesn't make a show out of this encounter. He steps forward, places a hand on the man's shoulder, and calls him by name. And it's that act, being called by name, that breaks the man. Not out of fear, but out of deep, overwhelming relief. The kind that says, "You know me." Even after everything. The disciples watch silently, each feeling something stir within them. Because they know this isn't just about one man. It's about all of them. They've all carried pieces of their past regrets, mistakes, moments they hoped no one would ever mention again. And in that moment, they realize Jesus doesn't just heal the future, he restores the past. But the past isn't always something that heals quietly. As the group continues their journey, a few begin to open up about their own stories. One disciple recalls a time when he was rejected by his family for choosing this path. Another confesses that even after witnessing miracles, he still wakes up in the middle of the night, unsure if he belongs here. There's something sacred about these confessions. No one interrupts. No one judges. They simply listen. And in doing so, something unexpected happens. The group begins to bond. Not over their strengths, but over their wounds. Then comes a sudden interruption. A Roman patrol is spotted up ahead. Nothing unusual on the surface, just soldiers moving through the region. But the sight alone brings tension. The zealot in the group stiffens. His past with Rome is not just painful, it's dangerous. And as they draw closer, his instinct to fight rises quickly. Jesus notices. He doesn't stop walking, but he turns slightly and meets the zealot's eyes. No words are spoken, but something unspoken passes between them. It's a moment of quiet confrontation. Will the disciple trust his old instincts, or the new life Jesus is calling him to? They pass the soldiers without incident. But the weight of that decision hangs in the air. The zealot walks a bit behind the group now, conflicted. You can tell, the war within him is louder than the one he used to fight with swords. And that's exactly what The Chosen explores so well: the inner wars, the battles people fight inside, long after the outward fighting ends. Later that day, the group rests under a grove of trees. One of the younger disciples, always eager to understand, quietly asks Jesus why he didn't say something to the soldiers. You could have stopped them, he says, or taught them. But Jesus, ever patient, replies with something that shifts the entire conversation. Not every battle is mine to fight in public. Some victories come in the waiting. That line lingers. Because it isn't just about the Romans, it's about everything they're facing. The doubts, the tensions, the fear of the unknown. Sometimes, the most powerful thing Jesus does is wait. This section ends with a quiet but powerful moment. One disciple, who's barely spoken for most of the episode, approaches Jesus that night. He sits beside him, silent at first, then asks a simple question. Why me? And Jesus answers not with a theological explanation, but with truth that pierces the soul, because you're willing to follow, even when you're unsure. And just like that, we're reminded of something crucial. Jesus didn't call the strongest, the smartest, or the most qualified. He called the willing. The ones who would keep walking, even when their hearts were unsure and their paths unclear. Episode 3 isn't about massive miracles or public teachings. It's about the healing that happens quietly, the questions we carry, the trust we learn slowly, and the moments when Jesus shows us that our pasts, no matter how broken, don't disqualify us, they prepare us. The journey continues, but the road is beginning to take a visible toll on the group. What started as a path filled with wonder and signs is now starting to feel like a wilderness of questions. And for some of the disciples, the silence is no longer peaceful, it's suffocating. Everyone is walking, but not everyone is walking with the same heart. Some are pushing forward out of obedience. Others are simply moving because they don't know what else to do. But underneath it all, something is brewing. As they stop for a rest near a well-traveled road, the arguments finally surface. It starts, smaller disagreement about supplies or sleeping arrangements, but it quickly grows into something deeper. One disciple voices what many have been thinking. We don't know where this is going anymore. The words hang heavy in the air. Others look away. A few nod silently, and then another voice joins in, sharper this time. Maybe we never did. It's not rebellion, it's heartbreak. This isn't a group of people turning against Jesus. It's a group of people wrestling with the cost of following him. Every step they take seems to pull them farther from everything they once understood, family traditions, even their own sense of who they are. But the most intense moment comes when one of the older disciples, someone deeply loyal, finally speaks up. His voice cracks as he says, "I gave up everything for this. Everything. And now I don't even recognize what we're doing anymore." There's no anger in his voice, just pain. And that's what makes it so powerful. It's a raw confession, one that silences even the most opinionated among them. Jesus is nearby during all this, listening, watching. He doesn't interrupt. He doesn't offer an immediate answer. Instead, he allows the moment to stretch. And then, when the silence becomes unbearable, he stands up and addresses them, not with a lecture, but with a story. He tells them about a farmer. A man who planted seeds, day after day, not knowing which ones would take root. The ground was dry. The sun was harsh. Some seeds were eaten. Some were blown away. But still, the farmer planted. Every morning, he returned to that same field, believing something would grow even when nothing was visible. The disciples listen quietly. They know this story isn't just about farming. It's about them. They're the seeds. They're the soil. They're the farmer. Jesus looks at each of them and simply says, "What we're building can't be rushed, but it's growing. Even if you can't see it yet." This moment is more than just comforting words, it's a turning point, not because everything is suddenly solved, but because Jesus is reminding them why they started following him in the first place. It was never about certainty. It was about trust. And trust means holding on, even when nothing makes sense. But not all of them are convinced. One disciple, more skeptical than the rest, pulls Jesus aside privately. He's frustrated, but not with Jesus. He's frustrated with himself. "I thought I had more faith than this," he says. "I thought I was stronger." Jesus looks at him with deep compassion and says, "Faith isn't about being strong. It's about being honest." That single sentence cuts through all the noise. Because in that moment, we see that Jesus isn't building a movement of perfect people. He's building something out of honesty, vulnerability, and surrender. Later, as they camp for the night, the group is quieter, not defeated, but humbled. The conflict didn't disappear, but something shifted. They're learning that unity doesn't mean agreement, it means commitment. It means showing up, staying together, and choosing love over pride even when it's hard. And just when things begin to settle, a messenger arrives in the darkness. He brings news not from the Romans, but from someone within the Jewish leadership. The message is cryptic, but urgent. He's watching him now, the messenger says. They're looking for a reason. No names are mentioned, but everyone knows who the he is. The danger is becoming real. No longer distant. No longer just rumors. The eyes of powerful men are turning toward Jesus, and, not with wonder, but with fear. The disciples exchange nervous glances. Some shift uncomfortably. Others instinctively move closer to Jesus, but he remains still. Not surprised, not alarmed, just present. His calmness, in the face of growing threats, only deepens the mystery around him. How can someone be so aware of what's coming and yet remain so at peace? One of the younger disciples whispers to another, "Does he know what they'll do to him?" And the answer comes, not from another disciple, but from Jesus himself, who quietly says, "Yes." That word, so simple, so heavy, brings everything into sharp focus. This isn't just a journey, it's a mission. A collision course with something dark and violent. And yet, Jesus isn't turning away. He's walking toward it. This episode, at its core, is about what happens when faith meets reality, when following Jesus becomes painful, when questions outweigh answers, but it's also about the kind of Savior he is. One who doesn't demand perfection. One who walks slowly with the broken. One who carries peace in the middle of chaos, because the danger isn't real, but because his purpose is greater than the fear. As the night deepens and the camp falls quiet, one thing becomes clear. The road ahead won't get easier, but they won't walk it alone. And that more than anything is the hope that carries them forward. By morning, the unease hasn't lifted. The messenger's words from the night before have settled in everyone's mind like fog. They're watching him now. The weight of that warning clings to every movement. For the first time, the disciples understand something they hadn't fully grasped until now. This journey with Jesus isn't just unpopular, it's dangerous. There's a quiet tension as they prepare to leave. No one says it aloud, but it's clear. Things are shifting. The atmosphere isn't just about faith anymore, it's about survival. Whispers of arrest, betrayal, and death loom in the background. Even though Jesus hasn't changed his pace or his posture, the world around him is beginning to sharpen its claws. And then, as if to test their willingness to continue, Jesus makes a decision that shocks everyone. He announces they're heading toward a location known to be Hastala Place, where he's already stirred controversy in the past. Several disciples immediately speak up. Why would we go there? It's not safe. People there hate you. Is this really the time to draw attention? But Jesus is resolute. He's not going for fame. He's not going to pick a fight. He's going because someone there needs to be seen. This is where Jesus' mission becomes even more clear, not just to gather crowds or deliver sermons, but to step directly into danger to reach the one no one else sees. What follows is one of the most suspenseful parts of the episode. As the group makes their way into this hostile region, their every step is cautious. Every face they pass could be a spy. Every alley could hide an informant. The disciples are alert, protective, but Jesus is composed, walking like a man who knows exactly what's waiting. And he does. They arrive at a marketplace, not flashy or large but thick with tension. Jesus scans the area, and almost immediately, his eyes land on someone. A man, isolated, hunched, forgotten. Not physically ill but crushed in spirit. The disciples don't recognize him, but Jesus walks straight toward him. And what happens next isn't loud, it isn't dramatic, but it's revolutionary. Jesus greets the man with kindness, something the man clearly isn't used to. He flinches, unsure. His eyes dart around, like he expects to be mocked or shamed. But Jesus kneels beside him and speaks gently. We don't hear every word, but we don't need to. What matters is this: Jesus has entered hostile territory, knowing the risk, just to speak life into someone who thought he was invisible. As this unfolds, trouble begins to stir nearby. A small group of religious leaders take notice. They whisper, point, and one of them steps away, no doubt to report the encounter. The disciples see it too. Panic begins to ripple. We need to leave, one of them says. Now, but Jesus finishes his moment with the man. He helps him stand. No miracle of healing, just dignity restored. A reminder that Jesus doesn't just fix bodies, he lifts souls. Then, without rushing, he signals the group to move. What follows is tense. As they exit the area, some of the disciples fall back, watching the crowd, checking their surroundings. One even grips a concealed dagger, an old instinct surfacing under pressure. But Jesus walks ahead, unshaken. It's as if he's teaching them. Courage doesn't come from weapons. It comes from obedience. Once they're clear of the town, emotions boil over. One disciple, deeply rattled, confronts Jesus. Why would you put us in danger like that for one man? One conversation. The words are honest, raw, even disrespectful, but they're real. And Jesus doesn't silence him. Instead, he replies with something that challenges them all. What's the point of safety if it keeps you from love? That question breaks something open. Because this is the dividing line for many of the disciples. Are they following Jesus because they believe he's the Messiah who will conquer? Or because they believe he's the Messiah who will love no matter the cost? The group continues walking, but the mood has shifted again. This time, it's not confusion or fear that binds them, it's they don't fully understand what just happened. They don't know why one man's soul was worth so much risk, but deep down, they feel it. This is who Jesus is. He doesn't avoid darkness. He steps into it. Not recklessly. Not for attention, but for love. Later that night, as they camp far from the hostile town, the group gathers around the fire with less argument, more reflection. One disciple admits, I didn't think I could do it, go into that place. Another responds, you did more than go. You stayed. There's a sense of quiet strength being born not from victory, but from obedience. Then someone asks Jesus a question that captures the spirit of the moment. What if they come for us? And Jesus, without fear, answers, then they'll find people who didn't run. This episode is shaping something powerful in the hearts of his followers. Not a movement of control, but a movement of courage. Not built on certainty but on deep, sacrificial love. And even though the road ahead is darker than ever, they're beginning to understand. This isn't about preserving their lives. It's about laying them down. The final stretch of this episode doesn't offers revelation. The kind of revelation that doesn't answer every question, but instead reveals what it truly costs to walk in the footsteps of Jesus. The disciples are quiet now. Not because they've found peace, but because they've encountered something deeper. Surrender. As the fire burns low, Jesus begins to speak, not with thunder, not with signs, just truth. Simple, honest, unsettling truth. The path ahead, he says, is not one of comfort. It is not one that the world will admire, but it is the only one that leads to life. His voice is steady. His eyes, filled with both compassion and steel, search each face. No one dares look away. And then, as if he can hear the questions they're all afraid to ask, he continues, "You will be hated. You will be rejected. You will be misunderstood not because you have done wrong, but because you belong to me." The words land like stones in the silence, heavy, irreversible, and yet, strangely freeing, because, in that moment, the disciples realize something vital. Jesus has never misled them. He has never promised ease. What he's offered, from the beginning, was truth and the chance to become part of something that would outlast every empire, every power, every fear. One of the disciples, still raw from earlier arguments, quietly asks, "Why us?" It's a question filled with both humility and hesitation. Why would the Messiah choose fishermen, tax collectors, former zealots, and the forgotten to carry a message that could change the world? Jesus doesn't smile. He doesn't joke. He simply replies, "Because you're willing." Not the smartest, not the strongest, not the most spiritual, just willing. The scene holds that tension. A divine pause, the kind that forces every heart to choose. Not just whether they'll continue with Jesus, but why. Is it still about miracles? About being part of something exciting? Or is it now about something more, about choosing him even when the path leads straight into danger, rejection, and sacrifice? One by one, the disciples nod. No grand declarations. No heroic speeches. Just quiet agreement. The kind that comes from people who are no longer chasing clarity. They're choosing trust. And then Jesus looks out toward the darkness beyond the trees, and says something chilling. It begins soon. Everyone feels the shift. The danger they've been sensing isn't far off anymore. It's near. The opposition is no longer forming, it's moving. Decisions are being made. Forces are gathering. The authorities are no longer curious, they're alarmed. Jesus has gone from being an unusual teacher to a perceived threat. And those in power don't like threats. But even in this, Jesus remains unshaken. His presence steadies them. Because if he is calm, even in the shadow of death, then, maybe, they can be too. The episode begins to close with one final emotional beat. One of the disciples, the one who had expressed doubt earlier, comes to Jesus quietly. His eyes are wet, not from fear, but from conviction. "I'm scared," he says, "but I'm not leaving." And Jesus responds with something that ties the entire episode together. Then fear has already lost. As the group begins to rest for the night, there's a different kind of silence now. Not confusion, not fear, but commitment. Each of them knows the road ahead will get harder, but they're still here, still following, still willing. And that's the point. The Chosen Season 5, Episode 3 doesn't end with a miracle or a massive event. It ends with hearts being refined, courage being born, and a group of flawed, scared, but deeply committed people saying yes to a journey that could cost them everything, because sometimes, the biggest miracle isn't the healing of a body, it's the transformation of a heart. This episode invites every viewer to wrestle with the same question. The disciples face, when following Jesus costs more than we expected, will we still stay close? Will we still believe? Will we still trust? It's not just a show, it's a mirror. And this episode, more than any before, holds it up to our hearts and quietly asks, will you follow even here? Because this moment of surrender, of risk, of love in the face of fear, this is where the real journey begins.